Hello, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning to everyone joining us in today's live Q&A that is focusing on COVID-19 vaccines and in particular on SinoVac that's been listed, actually granted the emergency use listing by WHO earlier this week. As usual, when we are talking about COVID-19 vaccines, I am joined by Dr. Kate O'Brien, WHO Director for Immunization, Biologicals and Vaccines, and also by Dr. Alejandro Cravioto, who is medical doctor in Mexico, but also the chair of WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization. Good morning, Alejandro, and good evening, Kate. Thank you for your time. We've got some good news this week that one more vaccine has been granted emergency use listing, which means that more vaccines could be used by COVAX and that we have more internationally recognized vaccines to be used against COVID-19. So maybe, Kate, you can start by telling us more about this vaccine, how it works, and what's the efficiency of these vaccines that we know so far.
Sure, happy to do that. So I think as the listeners here on our Facebook Live know, there are a number of different types of vaccines against coronavirus. And this particular vaccine is an inactivated vaccine. That means it's taking the virus and making sure it's dead, and it's purified and provided in the vaccine so that people can respond to the outside of that virus, which is the part of the virus that we develop an immune response to. So this is a tried and true method of producing vaccines. It's sort of a standard, usual way of producing viral vaccines. And so what's great about this vaccine is that it's the kind of vaccine that can be stored at refrigerated temperatures. It doesn't require some of these, what we've had with some of the other vaccines, ultra cold chain, really, really cold freezers that are not available in every part of the world or every country. So this is a really good part of the vaccine. And the vaccine was tested as all of the vaccines that we've authorized under emergency use listing was tested to be sure that it is protecting against especially severe disease and hospitalizations. And that's, of course, the thing that we really want vaccines to do is make sure that the most severe forms of the disease are what we're protecting against. This is a vaccine for those severe outcomes that was highly efficacious, means it worked extremely well against those severe outcomes. There were not as many cases of those severe outcomes in the trials, but of the cases, 100% of them were protected against. When you look at more mild illness, the vaccine prevented, in a combination of severe disease and more mild illness, it had about a 51% protective effect in the clinical trial in Brazil. So this is a vaccine that we're pleased has been authorized now for emergency use listing. And of course, the other two parts of emergency use listing is to look at the safety of the product and also the manufacturing quality to assure that vaccines that are produced and provided in large numbers around the world are consistently produced and can be done with the highest quality of manufacturing.
Thank you so much, Kate, for giving us this thorough explanation. Alejandro, as usual, the SAGE group met and is providing us with recommendations, actually providing member states with recommendations on how this vaccine can be used. So can you tell us what are your recommendations and who is this vaccine for?
This is a 2-dose vaccine that is given intramuscularly in the arm. And the doses have to be given between 3 and 4 weeks apart. And here, because of what Kate just said, that the general efficacy is a bit above 50%, we do not recommend that this interval is extended further than 4 weeks to make sure that the person is fully immunized in the shortest period of time. The vaccine is for people who are 18 years and above. And although we have not enough information about how the vaccine actually behaves in people above 60 years of age, data coming from the use of the vaccine in an open population in Chile gives us the confidence to say that the response in the elder group, people over 60, seems to be good enough for us not to put an upper limit into the use of the vaccine and then wait for these effectiveness trials once the vaccine is used in other places to make sure that it actually works. Some good news that we still haven't seen the data, but seems to be something reported in the international press, is that there's a town very close to Sao Paulo in Brazil in which over 80% of the adult population has been vaccinated with this Sinopharm vaccine, and the drop in cases, in hospitalizations, in deaths has been incredible compared with the rest of Brazil that continues to have a very severe problem with the pandemic. So this shows really that a covering of a large number of the population with this vaccine can give us what we're looking for, which is really a control of the spread of the epidemic.
Thank you, Alejandro. And here's one of the first questions we received is, can we mix Pfizer vaccine with SinoVac vaccine?
I think that the data we have so far published in the last couple of days shows that you can combine AstraZeneca in the first dose with the second dose of Pfizer vaccine. That is what we have information coming out of Spain, coming out of the UK, coming out of Germany. There is a bit more reactogenicity in people who receive this scheme, but nothing to worry us about. This comes at the time when we had, you remember, the issues related to the production of the AstraZeneca vaccine by the Indian companies that had to supply the vaccine for their own purposes, given the situation of the pandemic in India. So in that sense, people who had received the first dose of AstraZeneca and were in the possibility of passing over 12 weeks without receiving a second dose, that was when we thought this would be a very good way, if there was an available supply of Pfizer vaccine, to be able to combine the two. Studies are ongoing to see whether we can mix and match other vaccines, and especially in countries where these vaccines are already being used. So we will have more information later when these studies come up. But for now, the only thing that we can say is that you can combine these two vaccines, the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer, without any problem in the sense of efficacy. I don't know if Kate would like to add something to that.
Yeah, just, we have over 15 vaccines now that are being used in different countries. And so this question of, can you take one vaccine for one dose and a different vaccine for the second dose, we really just need to get the evidence in each of these combinations. In theory, because all of these vaccines are all designed to stimulate your own immune system to produce antibodies against the spike protein. It's that you've seen cartoons of what this virus looks like. It's got these, on the outside of the virus are these little spikes. And that's the part that your immune system responds to. And all of the vaccines in one way or another are inducing or stimulating your own immune system to develop antibodies against that spike. So just on basic principles of how vaccines work, we do think that the mix and match regimens are going to work, but it is important that we actually get data on the degree to which your immune response does respond to a second dose that's not the same vaccine as the first dose. Because there are these large number of vaccines now, it's going to take time in order to actually do the studies comparing different mix and match regimens. So as Alejandro said, we do now have some safety and immunogenicity data, the immune response data, when you combine in one dose or another dose the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines, but that's about the limit of the mix and match data that we have at this point.
Thank you so much, Kate. One of our viewers is actually asking if you can list all the vaccines that have been granted WHO emergency use listing so far.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. We also provide this on our website, but I'm happy to. So the products that have emergency use listing are the same products for which we have policy recommendations as well. So that's the Pfizer vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that vaccine is made in a number of different places, including from the Serum Institute of India. So those are EUL'd. Then we have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's also called the Janssen vaccine. There's the Moderna vaccine, the Sinopharm vaccine, and the SinoVac vaccine. So those are all the ones that are emergency use listed and have policy recommendations.
Thank you so much, Kate. And there were questions as well about other vaccines that are being under review by WHO to receive, hopefully in future, the EUL. So can you tell us more about ongoing work?
Yeah, sure can. So first of all, it's really up, I want to be clear, it's up to the manufacturer of the vaccine to submit information to WHO. It's not, there's no requirement of a manufacturer to come to WHO, but we are strongly encouraging manufacturers to do that. So the products, will review any product that meets the minimum criteria. In other words, it has the kind of data that's needed in order to be assessed for emergency use listing. So the products that are in assessment include the Sputnik V vaccine, which is made by the Gamaleya Center. The CanSino vaccine has started the process of discussions and data submission with WHO. The Novavax vaccine is also a product where we are in discussions with Novavax about exactly what's needed and when it's needed. And then there are a number of other products that are also in discussions. CureVac, the Bharat vaccine, which is called Covaxin, and we've received requests from other products, and we're in discussions with other manufacturers.
Thank you so much, Kate. We are having more and more questions coming in. One is, do we need to get COVID vaccine? Will we need to get COVID vaccine every year like a flu shot?
Go ahead, Kate.
Well, you can see that both of us took a big sigh in. So let me start, and I'll hand over to Alejandro. The answer is we don't know. It's too early to have that information. We need to see what is happening in the immune response of people who have received their vaccines already, how long that immune response lasts, and whether or not when you are exposed to the virus in the future, whether your immune system remembers what it needs to do in order to respond to that virus. So that's called a memory response. So this is an aspect of ongoing research. We're anxiously awaiting results of that research to determine whether the duration of immunity, the time that you stay immune after you've received vaccination, is durable, for how long it's durable. And the answer to that question may vary according to whether you're elderly, whether you're younger. It may vary also according to whether or not you're being exposed to variants of the virus or non-variants of the virus. So it also may vary according to which vaccine you received. It's not necessarily true that the answer to one of the vaccines is the same answer as the other vaccines. So this is definitely part of the ongoing research. And as that evidence becomes available, we will make policy recommendations about what programs should be doing about booster doses. Alejandro, I wonder if you want to add anything to that.
I would just say that one of the things that we do need is to speed up the vaccination. And that, of course, relates to the supply and the equity about how these vaccines can reach every country in the world, and how we can improve the amount we're sending to these countries through COVAX mainly, so that we can really have an idea of how the vaccination rate is really moving up, because that's what we have seen in countries that have been able to vaccinate large parts of their population, Israel, Bahrain, and others. And on the other hand, I do think that the studies so far are encouraging. We have had in the last few days data coming out of the Pfizer vaccine, which was really the first one, you remember, that received an approval both from the FDA and WHO and a safe recommendation, that up to 330 days after you've been vaccinated, you still have a good response that is in the protective levels around 70% with this vaccine. So in that sense, I think that we are slowly showing that the immune response at least can last for almost a year. And what worries us, as Kate was correctly saying, is the spread of these mutant strains, these variations of the original virus that have now been called with Greek letters so that we don't pejoritize anybody from where they came from, and that are really the more worrying part if we don't have a quick vaccination program that will prevent people from being exposed to these new virus types. So in that sense, I think that on one side, it's encouraging to see how these vaccination programs are going, but we're still far away from reaching a level that would really make us feel that we are on the safe path. Thank you.
Thank you both. And here's the next question from a LinkedIn viewer. If we have antibodies after getting COVID, why do we need vaccination at all?
Do you want to take that one, Alejandro?
I think that's a very good question. And some of us that have had COVID, unfortunately, have shown that we do have an antibody response that is actually enhanced by the vaccination. The problem with the response that we have to the natural infection is that if it's a mild infection, our level of antibodies are relatively low, and they need to be boosted through the response to a vaccine. So if you see some of the studies that have been done in people that have been infected and then vaccinated, the response is huge, and then the protection that is forever lasting much longer than if you just had your infection and did not have a booster part with the vaccine. I think that so far, with the knowledge that we have and the way that the immunity is lasting in months, I think that there's no reason to think that we should not vaccinate people that have already been exposed to the virus, since we do think we need both things to be able to make sure that the person is actually protected, especially this in lieu of the circulation of the variants, which, as I said before, is one of the most worrying parts in that sense. I think Kate would like to add something to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to add is that for an individual who knows for sure that they had COVID, they had a PCR test, and it's certain that they had COVID. We are seeing that as the person who asked the question, that there is protection. Generally speaking, there's protection against being reinfected. However, the variants are another question, and I think this is a concern that we have. Again, watching very carefully the research that's coming out about the ability of the vaccines to protect against the variants, and whether there's a difference between natural immunity and the ability of the vaccines to do that protection. So the second reason is that there are quite a number of people who think they had COVID, but they're not really sure. They either didn't have a test, and so we just don't want people to be mistakenly avoiding getting the protection that they need through the vaccines.
Thank you so much, Kate and Alejandro. Here's the next question from Husna, watching us on Facebook. Is it safe for pregnant women to get vaccinated? Will it have any side effects?
I think that that's a very important question. And the more information we have, the more it's clear that on one side, women who are pregnant have a more severe COVID infection that puts them at risk of dying, both themselves and the baby that is coming. So we, in spite of not having data from the phase 3 trials for all the vaccines that we have made recommendations, in all of them we have said that if the woman is exposed, if she is a health worker, for example, a teacher, if a woman can come in contact with the virus and get sick, then the risk of to the pregnancy by the vaccine is a lot lower than having a COVID infection. So we recommend that they get vaccinated. And so far, in many countries, there have been thousands of women that have gone through this process, and they have been safe. The follow-up of them and the outcome of the pregnancy has shown that the vaccines are not dangerous. And especially there's this ones like the SinoVac that we just approved, which is an inactivated vaccine, clearly is something that would give us the confidence that this is not a vaccine that is harmful for the child or for the mother. So in that sense, we believe that pregnant women should be vaccinated if they come to that conclusion and they accept the vaccine and they have a good advice from the people who provide health services from them. In the case of the way we have put our groups in the sense of vaccination, pregnancy was not one of the main ones in the roadmap that we have. And that is something that we're being discussed now, whether that should be moved and women who are pregnant should be prioritized in a different way according to the age groups, activities, and other things. But what we have found so far with the thousands of women who have been vaccinated is that the vaccines are safe in them and that the benefit that they give these people who might have a severe infection and die from it is huge.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And here's the next question. Are there any steps taken to initiate trials in pediatric?
So I can try and take that one. So already for some of the vaccines, the studies, the research to assess whether the vaccines are the right dose, whether they're safe, and whether they're inducing an immune response have been completed in younger teenagers, those who are 12 and older. So the Pfizer vaccine in particular has been, those studies have been completed. And that vaccine has been authorized by a number of countries for use in children who are 12 years and older. The other vaccines are also entering or already in studies of these children. And for some of the vaccines, they're being evaluated in kids at even younger ages. So again, this is ongoing research. And as the data become available, we will look at those data, just as regulators and policymakers in specific countries will be looking at those data. So yes, the trials are ongoing for most of the vaccines.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. Here is the next question. Are there any studies done to determine the rate of infection and severity of infection in the vaccinated population?
Yes. So this is a really big question. The products are authorized for use and policies are made based on predominantly the results of clinical trials. Even after vaccines begin to be used in much larger numbers of people in routine programs, we continue monitoring those vaccines, and they're monitored specifically for the degree of impact that the vaccines have when they're being deployed in the population. So there are a lot of studies that are going on to answer some of the questions that we have that weren't specifically answered in the clinical trials. We want more data on people who are older aged, because in some of the clinical trials, the number of people who were included who were of older age was quite limited. We also want information on the ability of the vaccines to protect against death, to protect against severe hospitalizations. And what we really want to know is how many people in the population, what proportion of the population has to be immunized until we start seeing ever greater and greater effects, what's referred to as herd immunity or indirect immunity. So there are a lot of studies going on, and a lot of them are coming out already. We're monitoring them really carefully, and they're particularly of interest when they're being done in places where there are some of the variants that are circulating, and that's predominantly how we're learning about which vaccines and how well they're performing against the variants of concern. Alex, I just wanted to mention something, when in the question before this about are there clinical trials going on in children, I do want to mention that children are at very, very low risk of actually getting COVID disease. And so the rationale for actually thinking about vaccinating children is predominantly around the potential for the vaccines to interrupt transmission. And when we're in this really difficult place, as we are right now, where the supply of vaccine is insufficient for everybody around the world, immunizing kids is not a high priority right now. The really important part is to make sure that people who are health workers and those who are at highest risk of severe disease, which means people who are elderly, people with underlying medical conditions, are prioritized for vaccines. And in due course, when the supply increases much more substantially, the rationale for immunizing children perhaps would be stronger, but at this point, that's not a priority from a WHO perspective.
And Kate, if I may,
please,
sorry, Alex.
Please.
The other problem we have here that comes up is the school reopening and the need for children to go back to school. So would you also comment on what do we need to reopen our schools if we're not going to vaccinate our children?
Yeah, so again, so important. I'm a pediatrician, and although I work on, as is Alejandro, although we work on vaccines, our concern is really for the health and welfare of children from all of the dimensions of their growing up and development phases. And so getting kids back to school is essential. It's essential for their mental health. It's essential for their social health. It's essential for their education and well-being. But what is important is that those adults around them are protected. And so the idea that you need to actually vaccinate children in order to reopen the schools, really what we're talking about is protection of those who are most at risk of having disease. And so certainly the adults around them, that's a priority. Teachers, people who are working in schools, but the actual sort of generalized immunization of children in order to send them back to school is not the predominant requirement. They can go back to school safely if what we're doing is immunizing those who are around them who are at risk.
Thank you so much, Kate. And here is a follow-up question about pregnant women. What would be the recommended period for vaccinated pregnant women? I assume the period during the pregnancy.
Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, so again, getting back to pregnant women, for each of these vaccines, and we're speaking specifically about the SinoVac vaccine, but we'll talk about all of them, the amount of evidence that we have on the safety in pregnancy is growing. There are sort of general principles about vaccines. The first is that, in the earliest period when you're pregnant, it's generally a period when we are more concerned about giving any kind of medication or a vaccine to a pregnant woman. So although we don't have specific concrete recommendations about exactly when during pregnancy it's safer or less safe, we have no reason to believe that any of these vaccines have any specific risk in pregnancy. What really is important is that a pregnant woman has a discussion with her healthcare provider and does an assessment about what her risk is of actually being exposed to COVID. And so for many women, their risk is very low. They may not be in a work environment or a social environment where they have a lot of exposures to people. So generally speaking, we do recommend that women wait until they're past the first trimester and into the second trimester when the baby's fully formed and is just growing. So it really is a discussion with your healthcare provider about when would be the appropriate time to get vaccinated.
Thank you so much, Kate. Here's a question from you on LinkedIn. What is getting done for people that are refusing the vaccines?
Well, one is trying to convince them that the other option is not a good one. If you look at what it means to have a severe infection or the possibility of dying, and this is a very democratic disease. We've all had people around us that have died of this infection, and that is one of the most extremely sad things in the world. And if there's any chance of preventing them from having a severe disease, being in a hospital or dying, I think that we have a choice now. And this is a choice that we have proven now with millions of people vaccinated that it's safe, that it's efficacious, and especially that protects not only you, but also the people around you. So not getting vaccinated is really not an option. And I think people should really, if they have questions, find someone who can answer them honestly. Try not to follow all these lies and things that are inexact that are published in social media, which is unfortunate but happens a lot. And then, of course, the people who have these issues against vaccines in general, not just this COVID one, which they feel is something that should not be done or given to humans. With those people, it's almost impossible to have a serious conversation. But on the other hand, with the people who have doubts, I think that there are many places, including the WHO webpage and others, in which your questions are answered about the safety, about the benefits, about who should be vaccinated or not. And I think that will help people come to a decision. And it's interesting, in countries that have a huge supply of vaccines, there's this reluctance to get vaccinated, while in many others that don't have this access to these vaccines, there are hundreds or thousands of people who are more than willing to get a vaccine to feel safe and be able to get back to their normal lives. So in that sense, I think the equity part is essential in the sense of having the supply, but also the convincing of people that this is the best way to go to be able to go back to have a normal life that I'm sure we all miss.
Thank you, Alejandro. Kate, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think that just a couple things to add to what Alejandro was sharing. Generally speaking, the vaccine hesitancy that people have is, first of all, it's quite a local phenomenon, and there are different circumstances and different things that are driving that in different parts of the world. The most important thing is that people have access to and are provided accurate, credible scientific information. A lot of misinformation is circulating around the world and in communities all over the world. And this is not just theoretically harmful. It's actually stopping or limiting people accessing what is a life-saving product. So this is a serious issue when people are having so much access to misinformation or simply incorrect information, and it has an influence on them. I think the other thing is that what's most important from the evaluations that we've done is that it really is about leaders in the community. It's about who people trust, where do they get their information from, and the more that can be understood by vaccine programs and assuring that the leaders in the community, who may be informal leaders, not necessarily formal positions of authority, that's really where it's important that those people have accurate information, so that when they're sharing it with people who rely on them, those people are getting information that will allow them to make a decision that's based on science.
Thank you both. And speaking of concerns that people have, here's one that I really would like you to clarify, because one of our viewers is asking what about people who died from vaccine. So I would really like you to clarify if this has happened.
So this is misinformation. We have also heard this being said, people dying after vaccination or from vaccination. So let me just make a couple of comments, and I'm sure Alejandro would like to add to it. The first thing is that the vaccine, I know what I'm about to say may sound kind of obvious, but the vaccine will only protect people from serious disease or death from COVID. The vaccine is not going to protect people from serious disease or death from other causes, heart attacks, strokes, cancer. So I realize what I'm saying seems like pretty obvious, and you don't need to be a vaccine person to kind of figure that part out. But the reason I'm mentioning it is, as we've been saying and explaining, the people who almost every country have started with in terms of being vaccinated are people who are elderly. And the reason that most programs are starting with people who are elderly is that elderly people are most at risk of getting a serious outcome from infection with COVID. Now, if you're immunizing largely people who are elderly, even without vaccine, a significant number of them over the course of time are going to die from the things that they otherwise are going. They are elderly people. They have many underlying conditions. and some of them are otherwise going to die. That has nothing to do with the vaccine. But when you start giving a vaccine to those groups of people, you are going to see deaths among people who did get vaccinated. That's unrelated to the vaccine. Nevertheless, we have ongoing safety evaluations of the vaccines, of every vaccine, COVID vaccine and every other vaccine that we provide. And so we do evaluate whether or not there's any association between the administration of a vaccine and deaths of people. And so I want to give the reassurance to people who are listening, this is being monitored and being watched, and there is no evidence that the vaccines are causing death. In fact, it's the opposite. The vaccines are protecting people from dying from COVID. So I hope that clarifies it. Certainly we will be seeing deaths among people who got vaccinated, but they are not causally related.
Thank you so much, Kate. Alejandro, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two more questions before we close. They are coming in different times, so I'm trying to summarize. One is for allergic people. Do we have any advice on SinoVac or other vaccine that may be recommended for people who are suffering from allergies?
The SinoVac and the Sinopharm vaccines being inactivated have a lot less response in the sense of allergy than we have seen with other vaccines. So there has been no issue there. Now, anybody that has had an allergic reaction to any vaccine has to be very careful about being vaccinated with another product. That we have said before for the other vaccines. But looking at the safety profile of both of these inactivated vaccines produced in China, none of them really have a profile that would really make us feel that there's a safety issue related to an allergic response. People can have responses to different other things that are sometimes in the vaccines. So what we say is that after you get vaccinated, you need to make sure that you have a period of observation of at least 15 to 30 minutes in which people realize that there's nothing happening to you after you have received any of the vaccines that we have recommended so far.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And maybe we can close with this one because we received a lot of comparison questions. Which one is better? Which one shall I get? What is the difference between X and Y vaccine? So can you maybe give some overall answer? Is there a better vaccine? Are there any vaccines that are better than the others, or actually they're all good enough for everyone?
I think the best way of answering this question is the best vaccine for you to get is the one you're offered. WHO has, for vaccines that we've looked at, for the products that are emergency use listed, all of them meet the highest international standards of safety and manufacturing. And they all meet the standard that was set by WHO at the beginning of this pandemic for the characteristics that vaccines would have to meet in order for them to be useful for protection of people and impact from a public health sense. All of the vaccines have very high efficacy against severe disease, hospitalization, and for those that were measuring it, efficacy against death. So any of the vaccines that are WHO emergency use listed are vaccines that WHO is standing behind in terms of the evidence on safety, efficacy, and quality manufacturing. The vaccine that you should get is the one that you're offered.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Alejandro, for answering a lot of questions today. I'm sure we'll have new sessions coming with you when we have more vaccines approved, as this is of high interest of our viewers. I would like to thank everyone who are watching us, and for those maybe who joined us late, because I see that you're asking questions that we answered earlier in the discussion, maybe to replay this session so you can get your questions answered. Also, a lot of those questions that you're posting, we answered in some of our previous sessions. So I would also invite you to if you are on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, to scroll through our video galleries so that you can find previous sessions. And I'm sure that all of these questions have already been answered. Thank you very much. For more information, obviously, you can visit our website or continue following us on our social media channels. And once again, thank you, Alejandro and Kate, for your time and for everything you do to make sure vaccines are safe and that we understand what's the science behind it.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Thanks, Alejandro.
Thank you for inviting us.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Kate. Yes.